All right. Welcome everyone to another episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast. Today, I'm by myself. Bernard Guenther is your host, and I have a very, very special guest. I'm very looking forward to this podcast episode, an interview with someone I've been really admiring for many, many years. It is Lubomir Arsov, the creator of a few amazing films. He's an amazing visual artist, a storyteller. And I would hope that most of the listeners of the Cosmic Matrix have at least seen one of his movies, which is In Shadow, which came out, what was it, 2017, I believe?
Yeah,
And then followed up by recently, The Kingdom. And then another film I want to talk about as well is The Forest King. It's really amazing. It's a little short film, animated film. But we're going to talk really about art, about storytelling, the times we're in, shadow work, the collective, everything. With Tico, it ties into all of it. So welcome to the podcast, Lubomir. Good to have you.
Bernard, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure. I'm very happy to speak to you. And, I've been a longtime follower and fan as well of your work.
Awesome. Great. So I want to just open this up with what I posted. I just looked up on my Facebook posts back in the days, 2017. I posted your film. That's when it came out. And I just read what I wrote on Facebook. This is a brilliant animated short film by Lubomir Arsov, a visionary journey through the fragmented unconscious, facing the shadow, and to be reborn in the light. It depicts in a grotesque and poetic way the soul enslaving forces acting on humanity and working through people, feeding off of the life force, the masks of the conditioned pathological personality, the shadow self, and the journey from darkness to light. That's most importantly. It has a quote unquote happy ending. And also, I'm a musician as well. I have a background as a musician. That's where I originally came from the US. And the music touched me as well. That was extremely well composed, in sync with the animation. And I literally had goosebumps watching it. And I really want to point this out that it reminded me really the importance of good quality artwork and the mission, the purpose of true art with symbolism and storytelling and the visuals and even the music that touches something deeper in the core. It really goes straight to the self. And that's sorely missing nowadays, right? So really appreciate that you're doing these kind of artworks, which really is helping the collective in so many ways, I believe. And I think how many people, 7 million people have watched the film so far on YouTube. I think it should be way more, but then again, I think not everybody can get it, depending on the level of being, I have to say. But whoever hasn't seen it yet, obviously I will post all the links in the show notes and make sure to check out the film, and we'll talk about that as well. But before we dive into your specific work, share a little bit about yourself, how, kind of like your journey in a nutshell, so to speak, how you came to what you're doing now, your inspirations, your lessons, your challenges, and all of that.
Absolutely. Thanks for that intro. That's really beautiful. And thank you also for championing some of my work and spreading it to your audience and being so kind and sharing all of that. So really, really appreciate it. There's definitely a kinship there I want to touch upon later. But about me, like many of us, our trajectory here has been at this time, this quote unquote awakening. Initially, for me, it was the curiosity, philosophical curiosity along the Western lineage. And then with the diving into shamanism, psychedelics, and entheogens in my 20s, opened up and shifted a lot of my perceptions. And through that, I started getting into more and more of the parapolitical, the geopolitical sphere of the on-ground situation, which, also started weaving with my psychological learnings, my personal psychological observations, and then the third tier, the greater umbrella of the spiritual world in this long game of eons of conscious evolution. And within all that was the practical aspect of my sustenance, of my calling as a human, and that was art, drawing, visual imagery, and storytelling, most of all. So all of those wove themselves together somehow and are still weaving themselves together. Sometimes I'm drawn and taken by one of those streams, and sometimes by the other. I can become myopic and more focused on the art. sometimes more so in the spirituality. But here I'm seeing the emerging quality of all of them coming together, and this grander understanding and that expression of the way I filter reality.
Mhm. Yeah, beautiful. So you speak, I'm curious because I had my own experiences as well, definitely in theogens, psychedelics. I spent time in Peru, I believe you as well, and people who are familiar with my work, I see it's a kind of two-edged sword, right? With the whole psychedelic community and all of that. People get hooked on peak experiences. Having said that, I definitely dove deep with psilocybin mushrooms, DMT, ayahuasca, all of that in my 20s and so forth as well, and had some profound experiences that kind of also triggered something, a bigger view. So what was your experience with that? Were you also coming face to face with certain aspects of your soul in terms of self-healing, or what kind of experiences kind of shifted your whole perception?
Yeah, well, it was first what it did was in my early 20s, it kind of it untethered my perception of myself and of things as they are, that that everything is as I assume it to be. So
Hmm.
that was a very first formative untethering, so that all of a sudden I started looking at things from multiple angles, and also untethered me from the cultural story that was painting everything for me. So that's a very foundational one that then grew in complexity and in various flavors. And of course, beyond the curiosity and the sort of the wanting for everything to be fixed from
Right.
a dose of like heroic LSD or psilocybin thing, and having a lot of naivete there, doing my spiritual bypassing, and reading a lot of the channeled works, which are some are valid, some are just mere curiosity and
Yeah.
fantasy, in my view. So going through those pathways, it was in my 30s that I finally entheogens opened up, psilocybin specifically
Hmm.
opened up something profound in me. And I'd love to dive into this with you a bit more. And that was the embodiment piece. And we know embodiment now is a buzzword.
Yeah.
But for me at that time, I was familiar with Peter Levine's work, with
Hmm.
some of the traumatic and somatic stuff that was emerging, but it hadn't reached yet the level of proliferation that it has at this point in time. And I had some very profound experiential teachings that were given to me over a course of 2 years as I kept coming back with the medicine, in which I was just shown what embodiment meant, and how, even though I was studying Alexander Lowen, he's one of Wilhelm Reich's students,
Hmm.
bioenergetics, a lot of body psychology. It opened up my mind. I still was not in touch with my body. I was very heady, very intellectual. And this is before I released In Shadow, actually, that I started having these experiences of really understanding that embodiment wasn't just regulation of the nervous system and all these very useful ways that the mainstream culture understands this stuff as we interface spirit and soma and just our understanding of reality. But for me, I saw it as literally consciousness, God, sort of. By the way, I'm sorry, there's a fly moving through the
Right.
camera
I
right
saw
now.
that.
Of all places, it's
Good
coming
timing
around
too.
here. Yeah, yeah. So
As
let's be
God
watchful.
is coming down.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see at what points what is said when it covers the camera. So let's we can track that. But essentially, I saw this in a greater depth and complexity. But the embodiment of all the numb, dispossessed, and exiled parts within our psyche, of the body being this unconscious vessel,
Hmm.
that not unconscious as in it's patterned according to nature, made of matter, carbon, of the physical reality, and how spirit in this great game was us being this intermediaries of allowing, opening, thawing, and embodying and bringing more consciousness into these numb parts, and therefore truly resurrecting the flesh, bringing
Yeah.
the spirit in, and through that then merging the two, and that was the great work of this age.
Hmm.
And it was through that actually that then went into kingdom and went into somewhat of a more embodied experience. But without going too much into detail, I'll just end it there. That was the most profound
Yeah.
thing that changed the trajectory of my embodied understanding of my direction and
Beautiful.
where
And
we're.
I can definitely see that embodied insight in your artwork and films as well. Absolutely, because it has deep psycho spiritual truths in there, esoteric truths, occult symbolisms of the process of the great work, right? And I'm glad you point that out because yes, embodiment is a buzzword. I mean, we call our program Embodied Soul Awakening, but early on, similar to you, my experience, understanding of embodiment is not just being merely in touch with your body, right, of the physically, but the root word in itself is even spirit incarnating in the flesh, right? It's by connecting to self, bringing down the divine force, the soul, so to speak, to connect to your light, to the kingdom within. That's the true process of embodiment, right? And I would even go far, like many people who seemingly seem in touch with their bodies, people who are just kind of addicted to working out and athletics and all of that, they can be disembodied actually. And using the workout as an armor, character armor, like Wilhelm Reich, just to strengthen the false self, so to speak, and cut themselves off from the true essence. So that's very important. And that's almost the epidemic nowadays, the disembodiment of humanity, right? That we're so disconnected from everything. So that's beautiful. So I just want to get, with looking in one of the first film, In Shadow, because I watched the films again, by the way. I haven't been in a while just to for this interview, and it was touching me again. I always get goosebumps. I don't get goosebumps that often anymore with today's art and music, and it really touches something deeper because it, the way it works with good art like that has some deeper penetration, so to speak. It really speaks to the true self through symbolism. It bypasses the conscious mind, right? And that's, I think, the true gift of this kind of art. And also the storytelling is so beautiful in your art because in Shadow, there's no dialogue, right? This is just the music and the visionary. In each drawing or slide you made, animation has so many symbols and messages or like impressions. Is almost, you could like write a whole book on the interpretation of it. I think. By the way, did anybody make a video about interpreting your film?
A few people have, yeah. The Russians, of course, have made it. I don't understand the videos, but a few people have made them. And right now, I think one of the top comments is someone that outlined.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, not to be a spoiler alert here, but, I'm going to want to talk about anyways through some of the aspects of the film because it's really profound. It ties into my work as well, what I speak in many other ways. And it's not only just my work, but I think these are eternal truths transmitted through various teachers throughout the ages, right? It's archetypal, as Carl Jung would say. Obviously, we're very familiar with Jung's work, shadow work. But the journey, it's pretty dark at the beginning, right? You have a really great way of displaying this dystopian modern world, right? Right at the beginning, this cube over the head of people, this visually cube, that's cage, almost the visual interpretation of the disembodiment, the head's disconnected from the body, really severed. And it starts off with these holes in the chest, right? Holes, which is also a great analogy. You see this in H. Almas's work, when people have just holes within themselves, which they try to fulfill with outside means, that disconnected from self, right? This whole fragmentation. And then as the film progresses, then all of a sudden these masks are being put onto people, these very eerie fake smiles. It's really fascinating. And that's kind of the false self, the false personality to adapt, right, to the social structure, so forth. And you go, I mean, this, especially because this film was made published in 2017. Now looking back, it's kind of almost a foreshadowing of what we see now, because you already like full on exposed big pharma, newborns being injected with vaccines, right? The entertainment, celebrity culture, the phone addiction, the narcissism, and the greed, the corporation, all of that, even pedophilia insights into there. So it's very dark journey going deep into the shadow, right, of the collective, of what's there. And what's so fascinating as you watch it, it exposes the world and exposes yourself, right? It's very confronting, I would say. It can be, I think, would even say very uncomfortable for people because this is what it really is. This is the shadow. This is the darkness in the world. We need to look at it, right? Yeah. So that's beautiful. And then I think halfway through, around the 9-minute mark or so, then all of a sudden things start to change because it got darker and darker. And I was like, oh my God, where's this leading to? And you go into others. You go into thought control, censorship, right? Comparing old slavery to modern slavery. It's all over, in a holistic way. But then towards the end, things start to get exposed, right? There's things start to combust and implode on itself, expose and disintegrate. And then really fascinating, maybe I don't know if it's inspired by your psychedelic journeys, maybe ayahuasca, people start to throw up this black goo, right? And it's this purging process. And then the fire of transformation comes in and everything's burned down. The mass is that the phoenix is literally rising and people are being reborn in the light, the male and female union, the baby, the innocent baby with the tree of life. And it ends very profoundly. I'm going to give it away, but I think I want to just name that because that really hit me when it just all of a sudden the silence and the white and the Buddha eyes come, right? And that's exactly the journey of from dark to light, right? Through the shadow work, going to spiritualize the self and, connect to self, to the divine on complete spiritualization. So it's just incredible the way you have created this. I'm just curious about the process itself. Like, do you just had it like a download or you sit down with the storyboards and how, give us a little insight into how you, in your creative process, basically.
Yeah, I'd love to. And that was a great summary. Really enjoyed hearing that. Thanks. um, the creation is interesting. It comes with an impulse first and foremost. Both Kingdom and In Shadow came as an impulse of indignation and a sort of a feeling of injustice and somewhat of an artist warrior spirit of rebellion,
Yeah.
of this feeling, this need to just push back and reveal. So when that happens, it usually happens with a song, and it's interesting. Both Kingdom and In Shadow came through that way. With In Shadow, I was listening hundreds of times. I was listening to a carbon-based life forms song.
Oh my God.
It's what.
I'm sorry, I have to not interrupt. This is literally my favorite electronic band.
Yeah.
Like I listen to it when I'm writing.
Yeah, amazing. Because
Yeah.
I'm just gonna open a new tab here for later. But there are a lot of analogies with just your public work, which you share, of course, broadly, and some of my things, which that's why I feel earlier on I said there's a certain kinship that I really enjoy. But yeah, so carbon-based life forms. The song is called it's from Hydroponic Garden, called MOS 6718, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that song has a deep melancholy. It has somewhat of an urgency. And the sense is that something, though, within all that is weaving through, and it's saying, like, but it's okay, but it's part of the game, it's part of the process. And so within that, my emotional body received that in a way that started bringing in imagery. And at that point, I was working on one of the just the process of making it was over 3 years. So I had seen iPet Gold 2. So a man from Montreal had made it. And it occurred to me that there actually is an audience for alternative art that shows stuff that I felt very alone in. And that gave me permission to start moving into the imagery that was coming through me. And I felt the need to portray to all those around me to begin with, and then to the world, a different way of understanding the situation we're in, which was very competently still at that point, elaborated on by many writers, many creators. You yourself were participating in that in a great way. And I felt my unique positioning was to create a visual tapestry that was merciless, unforgiving, and just moved at a pace that shook up a lot of that shadow debris so that then we could start dealing with it, hence the quote unquote darkness of it. And so I would listen to the music and I would move into trying to paint this tapestry of the various industries and the way that we ourselves were cooperating and participating, albeit unconsciously, within this great, strange situation that we're all in. And I wanted to paint as comprehensive of a picture as I could so that people saw the totality of it, while also fine-tuning and calibrating it in such a way that people wouldn't just turn it off. Maybe some of the more regular mainstream audience wouldn't just turn it off. And I didn't go into too many obscure topics that could make people write it off, as well as using just enough cliche to have people understand the message, but not cliche enough that it glazes over their eyes, as a lot of activist pieces, I think, do.
Yeah.
So Yeah, that was generally my approach.
Yeah. And also in a sense, you almost approached it without your own personal agenda, it seems like, right? Almost trying to get yourself out of the way that because it seems so confrontational in the positive sense. It reminds me of Gurdjieff talks about, in order to wake up a person, shocks are needed. And
Yeah.
sometimes repetitive shocks. So the first half of the film is definitely shocking. It kind of like gets you out of the trance we're in, and that's sometimes needed, right? Because there's no quote unquote gentle awakening. Sometimes the way I see it, I mean, it's a paradox what's happening in the world as well. You see this, I always say what happened over the past 4 years since the pandemic and this attempted enslavement of humanity, very dark, what's happening in the world, obviously, but it did trigger an awakening. It got in many people, right? Some people maybe disintegrated more, absolutely. They're gonna get, infected with Tico and go deeper into disembodiment, disintegration. But I've seen this a lot in the work I do with my wife, with people over the years. It forced people to question what is really going on. And more importantly, it puts a mirror up on themselves, even your film, right? To question yourself. And you cannot look away anymore. It touches something deeper. And once you have that splinter in the mind, as from Neo's Matrix, then okay, then you're off on the journey, right? And there's also the point of no return and all of that. But really, fascinating with music, how this affects you as well is really beautiful because I can relate to that. Um, I'm sure you're familiar with Alex Gray, right?
Yeah.
And he's an amazing visual artist. And I came across, even in the 90s, somebody gave me his book, Sacred Mirrors, right? That his first book about his art. And I remember I was in Germany, in the German Alps, and I took some psilocybin mushrooms and watched it and went through the book, and it opened something up. And that had my vision for my musical endeavor here in when I was in LA with my band, Revolve, and read his book, The Mission of Art. And I don't know if you've ever read it.
No.
It's really fascinating. I highly recommend it for a visual artist. But it reminds me of your work too. Like it puts a deeper question to what is art? What is the true mission of art? Because that's what we have lost nowadays, right? Even if in music, the entertainment industry, it's becoming a business. It's about money. It's about image. It's about mind control, all of that. Visual art has become bastardized, right? With modern art, like there's no soul. It's just a almost indulgement in the shadows, almost Luciferian in a sense, right? So there's no deeper purpose. But even within quote unquote dark art, and that's what I appreciate by Alex Gray, he also explored the darkness in his own, his own life. And I explored the darkness with playing very heavy dark music, using it, but looking back, losing it as shadow work to explore more feelings, emotions I've suppressed as a child, or my own teenage angst and then just anger and shame and guilt. Like a lot of this hap helped me work through just by listening to Alice in Chains, for example. Now I'm a Gen X, right? To kind of go deep into the dark, and he's talking about smack and all of this. But I could relate to that. It gave me an outlet, right? So that's why I think sometimes dark music or dark art is misinterpreted because when perceived in a certain context, it can help you in this process to resolve, to transmute. Yes, you can get stuck there, I feel as well, right? But then it's from dark to light, like in similar to you, like using art as a transformational process. So can you see this when you, especially in shadow, do this work, how you also were able to apply this to yourself, to your own shadow, to what you were going through? That kind of helped you to transmute or individuate, to so to speak, in Jungian terms.
Oh, big time. And one of the impulses that one of the things that helped me dive into the project of making in shadow, because it took a lot of effort, discipline, resources of my own, was Paul Levy's. I was reading
Mhm.
Wetiko, right? Dispelling Wetiko, and in it he spoke about art a little bit and about the mission of the artist. And specifically, I don't think he called it that. My friend Andrew Camargo speaks about this, but it's the shamanic artist, and what
Yeah.
that means of diving deep into the collective unconscious, into the personal unconscious, into both the darkness and the light, and being there fully for it. And to do so, you have to clear your own self, your own lens of perception. And then there's a greater calling which awakens a certain sense of nobility It's no longer a selfish, egoic, artistic impulse to make things, to be a personality, but tapping into that greater, and not that it's always available, but that greater noble impulse of, let me bring something from the greater truth beyond forms
Yeah.
into the actual essence of it all, and bring it back through beauty, craft, and the unique lens of my human being, while articulating archetypal and universal themes. There's something potent there, and that's what drives me to make these things when they're not profitable, or they don't bring anything other than deep personal satisfaction for what they do, or soul satisfaction. But they've in Shadow and Kingdom have both worked as alchemical tools for me. In Shadow was done at the peak of self-exploration, the dark unveilings of this whole spiritual, psycho-spiritual, parapolitical sphere that we're in, and some of the anxieties, some of the darker thoughts of hopelessness, I worked out through in Shadow by really marinating myself in that content. Creating each scene was me planning it, drawing it out, then directing my compositors to put it together. And the process of that made me own the whole thing. It made me feel like I moved through it all and made peace with it. Not only that, but the last part was very difficult to create, and that's the part that most people, of course, are attracted to, which is the awakening part, the part in which we see we see the crack through the illusions, etc. And that part I really had to sit with for months and ask for guidance with. And there was a lot of my mind, my heart were being scrambled whenever I try to feel into that. Just it's not readily available, and I'm still obviously unfolding my soul. And so, but finally getting through it and really working with it. It wasn't like one big inspiration came through and I was like, yeah, this is how it's going to end. I was really feeling into what's my own personal process, what is the universal process. Let me tune in more to that. Like first I had some spiritual bypassing, then I'm like, no, there's the shamanic dismemberment. There is the dismemberment. I'm going through it now. I'm learning about it more and showing that in the piece as well. And the testament to the truth of what I displayed, and I wanted to avoid as much visual cliches of ayahuasca visions, there's some or new age art. I didn't want to go too much into classicism, but I had some of those classic Greek, Roman sort of like archetypal body types. Of course, the bodies are naked and natural, but through that, the testament of its functionality was that to this day I still get people sharing with them that interestingly they're like, I experienced exactly what you showed in Shadow. And of course I doubt they experienced exactly that. Those visuals are, what are they exactly? But it's the feeling, the dismemberment, the restructuring back again, the unity, masculine and feminine, both outer and inner coming together. So long story short is those pieces have, of course, restructured my own being.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's also from an artist's perspective, if you're really true to that, it's that you're becoming, for lack of better words, a channel, right? Or you connect to the diamond, as I would say, your creative spirit, right? That's something comes through because the collective images are so strong. And I think that's a journey for the artist. And like you just described, and I can relate to this in my days as a musician and making music as well. It's not this like, oh, I'm just going to make this vision and just this, everything just gets out. It's like it's a battle within itself. It's like birth. It's difficult, right? I'm sure like you had moments over 3 years, kind of like maybe doubting yourself, getting stuck and this and that. I mean, because it's so, especially this kind of art is obviously deeply tuned within your inner process. It's not just something you do like, okay, for the superficial personality to kind of, enjoy itself, so to speak. It touches the soul, right? It touches everything that's in the way of it. So naturally, like as Sri Aurobindo would say, this yoga is a battle. It is in a sense a battle with ourselves, so to speak, and making room for what wants to come through. So is there any particular ways you have worked with it? Like tools you use like meditation or any practices to help you get in tune, or is it just, does it come whenever it comes?
Yeah, well, as we all know as artists, is the muse is not always dancing with us, so we just have to show up and the muse will find us. So a lot of it is discipline of staying with it. And I find that the more I stay with the art and not getting distracted by emails or new tabs opening on my browser, and those are just results of my inner resistance, really.
Yeah.
That's when it happens. When I stay with something for, it's not even that long, for 30 minutes to an hour with integrity and depth, something else opens up. And then I feel there's an embodied feeling of, oh, this is right.
Mm-hmm.
When something really works, I usually tear up, I cry, I get emotional,
Mm.
especially when I'm listening to music. And when that happens, I've put in the reps by now that I know when that happens, I'm like onto something real and true that is beyond me,
Yeah.
and I just listen to that and weave it in with everything else.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. I'm glad you brought in Paul Levy. He's a good friend of mine as well. I've done many interviews with him. He was also a guest speaker on our programs. And, he has now written 3 amazing books on Wetiko. It's, when you read his work, is also he's an amazing writer, right? With everything that comes through and really connecting the whole Jungian shadow work process with more the hyperdimensional process and other entities and beings that rule over us, and that comes through your work as well. Specifically, it reminded me in your second film, Kingdom, that came out just recently, right? Was it last year
April.
or was it April
April.
earlier this year? Okay, yeah. And that's also beautiful. I mean, I'm just gonna want to read the summary of it from your webpage. Kingdom is an audio-visual experience that serves as a template for empowerment. It models the path of awakening in the face of adversity, becoming whole and confronting inner and outer darkness in order to transform it. The film's visual and musical arrangement imprints a more courageous way of being. With repeated viewings, this imprint strengthens and becomes available to the viewer as an inner knowing. That's very true. Like, I highly recommend to watch your films more, like several times, because each time something else comes in, it's hard to just take it in one viewing. Absolutely. Um, it's against immense odds that the brilliance of one's soul spark ignites, and it's through the union of our sparks that the purifying inferno of truth blazes. One flame to ignite an inferno. And I like how you end with "et lux in tenebris," light in darkness. And that film like reminded me a lot, like you bringing in this Wetiko topic, or these other beings, or something interferes, right? With these black dots, starts off in the chest, and then these worms coming out of people's backs and whispering into their minds, just to kind of like the predator mind from Castaneda or Wetiko, right? All of these self-diminishing, self-defeating voices everybody has to varying degrees, and nobody questions where they come from. That's where Wetiko tags in, the whole social programming, and everybody keeps each other in line, and then you visualize this with the strings attached. And then fascinating, this one guy, then again, I'm describing the film a little bit just to talk about it, and people definitely need to watch it. And then the man stands up, sees the sword in the distance, right? Very obviously profound symbolism in that as well, this sword of light. And he starts taking off his mask and starts throwing up again violently, right? Like, once you get engaged in the process, there's always the theme of purgatory, purging. And it's a necessary process to shed. The only way out is in and through, to remove what's in the way of the light, right? And then it's really fascinating that, so beautifully symbolized, then all of a sudden, in this process, he meets the darkness, the evil, the devil right in front of him, right? Which we all know there's evil out there, but the devil turns into his own inner child. Right? And that's really profound, right? The inner child work, and he hugs it, right? And then it goes on. I don't want to give it all away, but the whole process is just so profound. It shows in a very visceral way, especially with the music, this vulnerable process of also inner child work, of like the innocence of the inner child we all have, and has become so hardened with everything else, right? And I was in my own process, and even people then in the film breaking down crying. But it's not the crying of suffering and grief. It's almost like the more you cry, the more you go through this process, the more light you possess, and these then become tears of joy, right? Once you really embody the kingdom within and dispel the whole darkness. And it's a beautiful follow-up to In Shadow, Kingdom itself. when the light shoots down and from above and dispels all darkness. It reminds me really big on a lot on Sri Aurobindo's work. As you may know, I'm big into his integral yoga. And he talks about the supramental consciousness, the divine consciousness that's trying to anchor itself from above, right? And dispel all the darkness for the ones who are receptive. And that kind of was a visual interpretation of his, teaching as well. So very, very profound. And I also want to give huge kudos to whoever made the music. Also in that piece is brilliant. Again, and now I get it now with how you also use music as inspiration, because it plays a big part in your work as well. So with this project or Kingdom, did this also come out of, because there was quite some time between 2017, this is almost like a 6-year period or break in between until you kind of felt to do this follow-up.
Yeah. Because these pieces are made on based on my own ability and decision to reorganize my life to make them, given all the complexities of that we have.
Yeah.
The hope is that there will be a revival of powerful new mythology in the coming years, and entertainment will be funded, and will be, we'll have more patrons of the arts, and the audience will be able to fund these things. But for now, we have to just do it on our own, strength. So here, while I was doing other things, a lot of people were, urging me. They were very hungry for some other experience, like in shadow, something to move them, something to help out.
Imagine, like, I was also waiting, when is the next one coming out?
Yeah. And so for me, going through my own process, first and foremost, it's my own soul development, my own connection to God and those around me, and any extra energy I can then put into these pieces. But the COVID moment was so absurd and so villainous at the same time, and seemingly so obvious yet not apparent to most people, which is a great stress test, I think, to where we're at as a collective consciousness. But parts of that basically created so much indignation in me, and again awoke that warrior artist in which I raised my the pen for my digital monitor.
Right.
I just started drawing because I was finishing up The Forest King. I was at Peru at that time. And this was the inspiration for Kingdom came in the Andes, actually. And I was listening to this one song, which is integrated in Kingdom, in the film, when the hero raises the sword. That's one song that then we built the other soundtrack around, composed by Secession Studios. So that whole film came to me through that song. And something about its brashness, about its direct epicness, there's almost reaching absurdity, and parts of the film do reach, in a way, the epicness reaches parts of absurdity. But I wanted to champion and give as much weight to the inner work, which is the real mythological work that all other mythologies and movies really emblemize through outward physical violence in the form of Marvel movies, etc. I wanted to really champion the actual inner alchemy that all other mythologies come out of, and I wanted to give it the same respect and urgency and power, right? So that we can inspire not only ourselves, because I can still get inspired by watching that movie to align to my own path, but inspire enough other people to not only be looking in the darkness and constantly be picking at how, quote unquote, they are controlling and manipulating us, but to ground themselves, to have the courage to stand up off their knees, both literally and spiritually and mentally, emotionally, and really have that great courage to raise the sword, which is not an easy task. Like we know it, so many forces against all of us, even those people like yourselves who speak publicly, and you guys are moving through this courageously. There's so much that is happening that we all have to move through day after day. And so I wanted to put something out as a way of dropping a little empowerment grenade in the space that we were in during COVID. And I knew that at that point it might not come out at the same time as everything unraveled, because after the trucker protests, I sensed an energetic shift. And I told my partner at the time, like, things are going to start unraveling. Like, watch, things are going to change. But I also knew that's not the end. Of course, trillions of dollars are going into a technocratic dystopian state, and this Ahrimanic potential prison for those who choose to be part of it in the future. So I knew that also Kingdom and its archetypal story would serve as a capsule of empowerment for years to come, because it would be needed. And it's not only for these, great situations that we find ourselves in. It's for the little things, like
Mm.
having to go through a job interview, having to,
Hmm.
go do a marathon and push your body through it. There's a heroic impulse in there,
Yeah.
and overcoming challenges as a human being in a physical realm. There's something profoundly beautiful and rewarding when we can push ourselves through that and be masters of our psyche, of our material physical body. It's just a beautiful process. So
Yeah. No, beautiful. And that's true. Like in Shadow was also more tuning into the parapolitical bigger picture, what's happening in the world. In Shadows really focused, okay, on the inner work and that process itself, right? Which is very important because you're right. We can also get this, especially nowadays, get distracted with all the, excuse me, shit that's happening in the world, right? And the darkness, and that I've been talking about this as well. David Whitehead, good friend of mine, he's also Canadian. I'm sure you know him. We talk about this black-pilled doom and gloom sentiment that's around the truther community as well, like where everything is a psyop, everything is a trap, this paranoia and extreme victim blame consciousness and negativity, which is for me an aspect of Wetiko, actually, kind of almost like letting the darkness take you over while you think you're defeating it by externalizing it all, but not really doing any inner work whatsoever. Do you see that as well? Have you seen that as well over the past few years, this sentiment of just negativity in many ways?
absolutely. And it's the most profound when I see myself participating in it. And
Yeah,
that's when I understand it the most. And of course, that's the only way we can understand things, is to go
yeah,
through them. But yeah, I
same.
saw during COVID, I did see very much, first we had the indignation, and people like you and I, just because we've been in the space, we recognize those markers quite early on. We're like, oh, all right, this is what they're going for. For other people, it took a lot more time. But I saw that the alternative space, out of necessity, kind of had to keep pointing to things like, hey, this is happening and that's
Yeah,
happening. And our fear body just started extrapolating what may be happening. And I got sucked into that too. It's not that we were wrong, but at that point, we start functioning as cloud servers of negative manifestation. And it's almost like, if there is there is the darker force, willingly or unwillingly uses our own bodies to amplify its own envisioning of a dark future by us constantly actualizing it. So
yeah,
this is where a degree of wisdom is necessary, right? To see, like, beyond the mainstream narrative, which is disempowering and foolish
yeah,
and then a lot of the alternative narrative, which excites our traumas, and a lot of dysregulated, like, people just get stuck in that cycle. There's a middle path, and to use it Steiner's terms, in a way, not
yeah,
that they correlate to Lucifer and Ahriman and Christ, but the middle path truly is being wise enough to know what the threats are, and to know also when to tap in and out of that space, and then envision that which
mhm,
we will into existence. And of
yes,
course, that's the most difficult part, because to will something, to imagine creatively something that does not yet exist, what is not available in the cultural menu, something we have not experienced, which is perhaps greater harmony, empowerment, a sense of love, a sense of creation in this world, some sort of a more idealized, not a utopia, but a more idealized version of our
mm,
reality, of our immediate reality. It's not available to us because most, if not all of us, have never lived through that. So it
yeah,
requires not only divine inspiration to peer into it, but a lot of personal will to stay with it and then act in accord with it so that we can bring it in.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Now, ultimately, it's about truth, and it goes into the "et lux in tenebris, light in darkness." Um, that the darkness is an illusion, and I've talked to my good friend Elish Nelik from India. He's very deep into Sri Aurobindo's work, and we had a couple podcasts about the problem of evil, the divine and undivine forces, really understanding that. And you're right, I end up taking myself out of the equation. I can get caught up in the external world, and you don't want to, as Paul Levy said, you don't want to deny evil either and be in this new age. Oh, everything is light, nothing evil exists. There's a higher truth to that, but it's easily be used for spiritual bypassing, right? So you have the balance. It's important to point out the corruption, what's going on in the world, But if it's to that extent that you project evil and negativity all in the world exclusively without facing it within yourself, and that's where the shadow work comes in, right? It's all teachers have talked about this. And the way I now realize it more and more, dark and light, good and evil, is actually not a duality in that sense, because all there is light, as you beautifully show in both of your films, especially to the end. It just like the sun is always there shining. It's not going anywhere. It's just covered up by the clouds. So we need to pierce through the clouds within ourselves to bring down the light, right? Evil, as Sri Aurobindo said, cannot exist and on its own as an absolute. Only the light exists, only the truth. And I think that's the process. That's what we need to realize. And I also want to just mention what you said before, because that's very true with Kingdom. It's not these big acts, right, of the warrior spirit and speaking out, because everybody's doing what they're called to do. What I do, I feel that's what I'm, my path, my lessons, what I've, am inspired to do. Same with my wife and same you, but I don't expect people to do what I do. Like, we all need to find our personal myth within all of that, right? And our own God-given talents, which once you connect to that, everybody has something unique to contribute. That's the way I see it, right? In terms of the light. But what you just shared reminds me also, the warrior spirit is all about courage. Courage is such a key aspect. And recently I've gotten more into David Hawkins' work, his map of consciousness, right? Laura and I had an episode about this calling How to Raise Your Levels of Consciousness, and really profound work. He actually used to live here in Sedona. And I can see how his work can also be intellectualized and used for spiritual bypassing. There's that aspect, but there's profound truth in that. And his critical barrier on the map of consciousness is courage at 200, right? 85% are below 200. They're stuck in desire, anger, fear, victim, shame, guilt, and all of that, just externalizing everything. And the critical threshold is to pierce through courage, to have the courage, not only to speak out, but to do what you need to do in your own life. And I see this in my own life as well. Whatever endeavor I faced in my life, even writing or public speaking, I had to collect immense courage to do it, because I had immense fear of public speaking or putting myself out there. I'm sure you experienced that in your artwork as well, like especially putting a piece like that out as someone say you're exposing your soul to the world. So it takes courage, and that's really what we need.
Yeah, totally. Courage is key. And inner work, courage to look at things, to stay with the discomfort of what is inside, something that makes us want to flee, that brings crippling shame. The courage to stay with those things is extremely necessary. And for me, if it wasn't for little steps of courage, like I grew up with almost debilitating insecurities when coming out of high school, which is, it's not that long ago. And each step for me of developing the man that I am now and the man that I am becoming, and the things that come out of me as a result, where, that's a point where I can celebrate. And I'm allowing myself even more and more to celebrate these aspects of me. Like, I can say that publicly here now, because there's a feeling of, like it's that those acts that of uncertainty, of almost faith, pay off, and they compound. And it's almost like existence and life requires acts of courage. It requires us to risk what we know in small parts and leap on to the next rock, and then the next rock, not knowing what's there. But and something about that grows the bandwidth, the amplitude of our own being. Yes, yeah, courage, super, super important, especially now.
Yeah, and you made a good point. David Hawkins said the same thing. Courage is not only externally oriented in whatever you want to do with your life, but the courage to face yourself, right? To get out of the blame, right? And, like any spiritual teaching talks about, even Gurdjieff, sometimes more harsh, you have to face the lies you're telling yourself and all of that. And that's also beautifully depicted in a sense in the illusion, right? Of who we think we are and how we try to appear towards others, the split, right? Inner versus outer. And that needs to be unified. Beautiful. We're nearing the end of the first hour, and I really want to dive deeper also in the second hour, talking about the future of transhumanism. I'm interested in your insight, Ahriman. Let's look into Steiner's work, the occult forces. I want to talk about the importance of the personal myth, our story, all of that, right? But also, how can people support it? Because I can imagine a visual artist with this kind of work, you know, by the way, you also do work with studios, right? They hire you. What's professionally, what's happening for you?
Yeah, so professionally, I've worked as a storyboard artist and director for animated productions, and feature films, TV shows,
Mhm.
etc. Lately, I am focusing more on independent work and finding a way to do that. People, what may be coming up is it just I have to really decide to dive into it because it's a long process. But making a animated feature film, I have
Mm.
quite a few ideas and speaking to some people, so we'll see um, how that unfolds. But people can support me right now. I'm not too present on social media, but you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, under Lubomir Arsov, or go to lubomirarsov.com. You're free to donate if you want to support my work.
Mhm.
Those are the main portals, really.
Excellent. I'll link to all of those in the short show notes as well. And for anybody who's not a member yet of the Cosmic Matrix podcast, you can sign up on my website, veilofreality.com, and then have access to all the second hours of all our podcasts where we dive deeper. Most often also talk about things we cannot talk in the first hour because quite a few episodes, by the way, have been already canceled and deleted, taken off from YouTube
Mm.
because we said nasty, bad things that don't align with the ministry of truth. But thanks so much, Lubomir, and we'll be right back.